Put the bunny back in the box.
I knew you was a punk, and I was right. You been playing us all along. You a free man.
I said, put the bunny back in the box.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and it is an unprecedented time in the comic book industry. We've never really seen things like this before, and the industry has really it has been evolving for maybe the past 5 or 6 years. We've seen independent comic creators and crowdfunding become a big part of the industry. And with me today to kind of talk about that perspective on all the things that we've learned, with Diamond Comics halting distribution of comic books nationwide, is Tim Lim. How you doing, Tim?
I'm doing great. I hope everything is going well in your neck of the woods, Wes.
Well, you know what? We're actually doing pretty good here. We did have our first confirmed case here on the island, but it was still quite a ways away. And that person wasn't actually from the local place. They came in from another location. So hopefully it was isolated. I guess they still have some people under observations, but I think everyone worldwide is really seeing the effects on this. It's going to be different for everything, but we're going to talk more about the comic book industry. Obviously, that's what the channel's about. You're a semi-pro. You're published through Antarctic Press, and you also do crowdfunding comics like that. How has it affected you personally so far?
I am very lucky in that it hasn't really affected me at all. Part of the reason why it hasn't is that our first crowdfunded book came out in February and then just recently finished, which meant that any person or any customer who is under economic or financial distress at the moment, who needs to tighten the wallet, they've already paid us. And so these books are ready to ship. Now, for our second campaign, or for like Common America on the Indiegogo, we're going to have to try and reconsider that one, or at least lower our expectations, because we don't know how that's going to be affecting us. The other thing, too, is that I think where it probably is affecting us the most is in regards to conventions. We do anywhere between 10 and 15 a year, just depending on volume. And already the 2 that we were slated to do in April have already been canceled, not by the convention runners, but by the state and local authorities who have mandated that places of social gatherings be shut down or at least halted. And so that's what's happened. I think they're actually going to move the date to later this year, if not to next year. So a lot of this stuff is things that we're looking forward to, but hasn't impacted us lately, but it has impacted a lot of friends of ours.
So, generally speaking, I don't want you to talk about anybody's, business specifically. What are some of your peers that, is in the indie comic creator community? What are some of the things that they're experiencing right now?
So, for example, Mark and I we're very blessed in that we do crowdfunding comics. So we have a revenue stream coming in from doing these. But I have a lot of friends who are artists who make their bread and butter doing conventions. And I know that they're suffering because they do like 3 times as many as we do. I also have a lot of friends who are vendors, and it's the same thing. They don't have an online presence. They make most of their money doing it this way. And then I have quite a few number of friends who run comic book stores, and they're basically treading water trying to survive because they feel like within 3 or 4 weeks of basically being either in a slump or a self-imposed quarantine, or the effects of people who are self-quarantining and not going outside, they're going to start seeing the financial ramifications of it. I know that there's several anecdotal stories out there, or self-professed stories of people shutting down stores because they just can't survive being closed for 2 weeks. And with the whole thing that's going on with Diamond, as was announced yesterday, that's probably going to impact some more people. So as far as our friends and acquaintances go, we're definitely seeing it. I don't really have any friends I can think of who are maybe younger and in the industry as of now working for the big 2, Marvel or DC. So I don't know how they're being impacted by it. But I'm guessing that as deadlines shift and as the landscape changes, I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of their priorities change and a lot of their focuses being shifted elsewhere.
So I know that you have ninjainc.com. I believe you have a DeviantArt page. Obviously, you have the crowdfunded book. So you have a heavy presence online as far as ways people that can connect with you or order products and things like that. Do you think following this that maybe some of the vendors and other people associated with the industry that maybe didn't have that online presence, are they going to see the need to move over there so they'll have a fail safe and a backup, for unforeseen circumstances like this moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that necessity is the mother of invention. And I think that one thing that's going to happen on a national level is that people are going to start seeing how our supply chains work. And I think it's going to wake up a lot of folks in terms of looking at where we get a lot of our product, how things are manufactured. And I'm not going to beat around the bush by saying this, but I think that the pride in American ingenuity is going to have a resurgence almost in the way it was back in the 80s. You want made in the USA. And it's not just something that's relegated to us per se as a country. I think that every country in the world that gets the majority of their products from elsewhere will be looking at this again and looking at what they can do to manufacture things that are kind of homegrown. So one of the things I think that artists can do, and you're already seeing it, is that they're basically having their own, I guess, online conventions. So that's one way of doing it. But the other one is what you were talking about, which is having a store that people can buy things from. I mean, for example, we have our good friends, the Rags crew, that's run by Brian Ball. Pretty much any product that you want, you can get through his online store. And best of all, they're all made in the USA. I don't know if that's something that he advertises, but I know personally that that's true, that all of his products are made in America, so that that if you're an American buyer, that you're going to have pretty much an uninterrupted supply chain, so much as UPS, FedEx, and USPS are running operationally. Other artist friends of mine, like Edwin Wong, he has a pretty good online store, and some of the more popular favorites for online purchases, like Warren Lau, or Lowe, I don't know how his last name is pronounced, he has a really good store presence, as does J. Scott Campbell. So these are just some examples of how you can basically run the operation of a convention, but from the comfort of home and having to only worry on one of two things: where you get your product and how you get it shipped.
Now, with everything that's going on, I imagine that we're going to see extreme delays. Well, I don't want to say extreme. We are going to see delays, at some of these indie comics. Not talking about the big two, but your Dynamites, your Booms, and all those companies. So people's paychecks are likely going to be slipped back, or maybe their projects that had already been okayed are going to be canceled. Do you think this is going to lead to an influx of maybe some of those indie creators moving into the crowdfunding realm, or maybe opening up commissions that weren't there before? And there's just going to be a lot more choice for consumers that are looking, to maybe connect with artists and creators more like you and Brian Ball have done online and things of that nature?
I think it depends on timing. So it depends on how long the nature of the pandemic lasts and how long people are willing to quarantine. For example, let's say optimistically this is all over in 2 weeks. The big two will not have to push anything really, and so the whole moving of paychecks thing is probably not going to even be considered. But let's say worst case scenario, it does occur. You're going to have to try and innovate. So for example, let's take the movie industry. There's been talks, I don't know if they've decided to do it or not, but there's already been talks about having like Wonder Woman being pushed to just a digital streaming platform so that people can just download it and watch it from the comfort of their own homes. I know a lot of people are for that because, one, it's going to be cheaper, and two, we're going to start seeing numbers come in terms of how does this stack up when you compare it to, let's say, movie theater sales. So we're going to learn some things. The other thing that might happen is with Marvel and DC, with the whole Diamond announcement, and this is just speculation on my part, I'm not a pro, I don't know anything about this, I'm just thinking from someone outside of the industry, but the rationale for Diamond doing what it did, I think might be twofold. One of them is the nature of comic book stores not getting the customers in, so at this point, it does not behoove them to have to buy product that's going to go unmoved simply because the customers aren't there. But I think the other thing has to do with the supply chain. There are publishers who use Chinese manufacturers for their printing. And I think a lot of them are stuck because the price point that they've enjoyed so far is going to be dwindled or risky simply because we do not know how product is going to move in and out of China at the moment. So they're trying to find American printers. I do know that some of the companies do print in America, 3 that I can think of as far as printing is concerned. But until these other publishers can catch up to speed, that price point is going to be drastically changed. And so I don't know what the big 2, for example, are going to do to try and innovate. Are Marvel and DC going to go into crowdfunding? Are they going to have more digital sales? Are they going to have basically buy direct options for their books? These are things that it'll be interesting to see, and we're only going to see them if things get progressively worse, because they're going to have to try and innovate to survive. So I think it'll be very fascinating to see how people change their business strategy with the changing times.
I do want to talk about printers. This is another thing that I was interested in. We know some of these printers are probably in states, and they're going to be considered non-essential. So you're all of a sudden your supply is going to be dwindled down. Do you see people maybe that are trying to fulfill campaigns, or even companies that are trying to even print out their comics and try to distribute them? Do you see a queue lining up for these products to actually get into distribution and actually get out?
Yes, in the sense that the printer that I use is the same one that Doug TenNapel uses, and they're based out of the South. And he's actually seeing an influx of business. I know a lot of it is my referrals and Doug TenNapel's referrals, because suddenly a lot of people who have crowdfunded books that were planning on fulfilling in the spring, they're panicking because they were looking at Chinese printers as the cheapest option. And the printer that we're using, they're very competitive in terms of trying to price match what it is that people overseas are quoting them. So you do have a queue of people lining up for this. And I think that's great because, like I said, if you can get a price point down where you can match your Chinese competitors, why not do it? There's nothing to lose and everything to gain. It's local, so you're supporting our economy. And 2, it's expedient in terms of shipping. Most people do not factor that in when they buy from a Chinese printer because the price looks so good. But depending on the speed at which you want to deliver the product, you're either going to go by air or by boat. By boat is going to be significantly cheaper, but you're going to be waiting a much longer time, anywhere between 3 to 8 weeks. Air is a lot more expensive, but you're going to be getting it within days, if not a week to 2 weeks. Whereas a lot of the American printers will be doing it in 2 weeks. Now, I have had a lot of people say, well, that's not true because I quoted this printer and they're a lot more expensive. That might be true, but in this economic turn that we're taking, again, you have supply and demand. If there's a demand for printers that are more domestic and there's more business coming in, they're going to lower their price because of the influx of people who are coming in. And they're going to want to entice you to stay with them, especially because in the wake of pandemics or national emergencies, Americans tend to be very not only proactive, but after the emergency, they don't forget and they try to keep in place the things that they learn. Look at what's happened in the post 9/11 culture. We have all these TSA regulations, and a lot of them have not been ameliorated. Even though we haven't had a major terrorist attack on the same level as 9/11, you still have to take off your shoes at airport security. And if nothing more, they've actually increased the security measures. So I think that a lot of these things, regardless of how long the pandemic lasts, I think there's going to be long-lasting lessons that are going to be had.
I couldn't agree more. So I know that you and Mark, basically, your plan is to put out one crowdfunded comic, I believe, a quarter, right? 4 in a year.
That's the goal. We know for a fact that we're going to do at least 3.
So how is this affecting you guys personally? Is this changing your outlook as far as the way that you're projecting out your projects? I know that you were looking at, there was some bidding going on, I think, on one project. Do you think that's going to maybe go away and you're going to have less options? How is this going to affect you guys moving forward? Because I know you had a lot of plans.
The only thing I can foresee is in an economic downturn, depending on how it affects the publishers, and some of these things are out of their control. Exhibit A, diamond distribution. Antarctic Press is number one in terms of who we do business with, and they always get the first option. Their editorial looks at our books. They decide if they want to put them on the shelves or not, and if they don't, that's fine. We actually don't ask questions, and they don't give us a reason. They just say that they pass on it. So regarding our crowdfunded books, depending on how things are with them economically, that might have an impact on us in terms of how those books make it onto shelves. However, one thing that we are doing this year is the digital option. So we're going to try and put our books on Comixology. And I say try because we've had several friends who have tried to get their books on, and they're on this like infinite waiting list where you're not actually given a timetable on when your book is going to be published through them. So I've never done it before, but that's something that we're going to do to try and bypass that so that people who want to read our books can. As far as our overall schedule is concerned, I do not think it's going to impact our schedule of release. What it is going to impact, though, is how we look at our margins. By margins, I mean how much did it cost for us to produce the book versus how much money we expect to make. One reason our margins for Common America were so high was because there were only two people essentially working on the book, and that was Mark Pellegrini and I. The only other overhead that we had was we paid 3 artists, and those 3 artists were very, very good, but definitely within a workable budget. So our overhead was very low. Depending on how the economy goes by the end of the year, we might have to just keep that in place and not really spend on more overhead because, like I said, a lot of our money, we don't make, like he and I do not make a lot of money personally. All of it is reinvested in our LLC and in our books. But it also might mean that we might have to cut back a little bit in terms of hiring, let's say, 5 artists to do 5 different variants or pinups or whatever. We might have to scale that back so that economically we can keep those margins in place. But we feel that our price point being very competitive at $10 a book, I do not think that we're doing anything cost prohibitive. I think that people who are shut in, they're still going to want some basic luxuries that are affordable and that will give them a lot of things to be entertained. So we are doing our part to try and read the lay of the land and adjust accordingly.
Well, that's great news. We're all, I think we're all just it's starting to sink in, how this is affecting all of us. And I don't think in 3 weeks, our understanding will be the exact same as it is today. It's all changing over time. It sounds like you and Mark have a good hold on it. Thank you so much for coming on the channel and kind of explaining how some of this is going to affect indie creators as far as, the market size, printing, crowdfunding. There's a lot of things that are going to be evolving and changing very rapidly. And I appreciate you taking the time and kind of explaining a little bit of that to me and the viewers.
Thank you very much, Wes. And for your listeners out there, I just want to let you all know that everyone is praying for you. Stay safe. Don't panic. Everything will be fine. Use this time to innovate and, most importantly, learn so that when something like this happens the next time, everyone will be prepared.
I couldn't have said it better myself, my friend. Thanks a lot, Tim. I'll talk to you later.
Have a good one. Bye.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.